A general who considered himself the pinnacle of military strategy, someone who dared to challenge even the US president, but also someone so respected that Japan once called him the last shogun. Who is Douglas MacArthur? A strategic genius or just an arrogant person who doesn't know when to stop? In today's video, we will explore the dramatic story of this general, from great victories on the battlefield to painful stumbles in politics. Get ready, because this isn't a dry history lesson, but an adventure into the mind of a man who believed he was right, even when the whole world told him he was wrong. Welcome to Faces of History. Here we uncover fascinating stories from the past and dive into the lives of legendary figures who shaped the course of world history. If you're passionate about history and the incredible journeys of those who made it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. Let's embark on this inspiring journey through time together. Douglas MacArthur's glorious military career. Douglas MacArthur was more than just an ordinary general. He was a shining star in American military history, a star that was sometimes so bright it was blinding. With a career that spanned 2 world wars and the Korean War, he built a glorious and controversial legacy. 1. Star of World War II, hero of the Pacific Front. During World War II, MacArthur was tasked with defending the Philippines from the Japanese army. No easy job, especially when you have an under-equipped army and a powerful opponent like Japan. But what happens? The Japanese quickly overcame MacArthur's lines. Failure? Maybe. But he did what only MacArthur dared do: turn a retreat into a moment of heroism. When he was forced to leave the Philippines, he left behind a promise that will resonate throughout history. "I will return." And sure enough, he returned, leading the campaign to retake the Philippines in 1944. With a clever island-hopping tactic, ignoring unnecessary military bases and focusing on targets. Important, MacArthur sent American troops deep into Japanese-controlled territory, causing the Japanese army to stagger. There's a bit of irony here. If you watch old documentaries, there's an image of MacArthur stepping off the ship in the Philippines, looking as stylish as if he were filming a Hollywood movie rather than going to war. But that's MacArthur, always knowing how to make himself the center of everyone's attention. 2. Liberator of Japan and last shogun. After the victory, MacArthur became the military governor of Japan, a role not unlike a modern-day shogun. Under his leadership, Japan was not only rebuilt, but also transformed into a democratic and modern country. He is remembered for his decisive, sometimes authoritarian, rewriting of the Japanese Constitution. And the most surprising thing? An American like him included a demilitarization clause in the Japanese Constitution, something many Japanese still consider the foundation for their peace. But imagine MacArthur, a famous war general, demanding that a country abandon its military. It's like a famous chef advising you to go on a diet. 3. Korean War, a hero again, until he's no longer a hero. When the Korean War broke out, MacArthur returned to the big stage. This time, he was the leader of the United Nations forces, fighting to repel North Korean troops advancing deep into South Korean territory. MacArthur carried out one of the most daring military campaigns in history, the Incheon landing. With harsh weather, dangerous terrain, and a very high possibility of failure, he still decided to take the risk. And the result? A resounding victory, bringing United Nations troops from a defensive position to an offensive one. But MacArthur was MacArthur. He never knew when to stop. As his army approached the Chinese border, Beijing responded by sending hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the Yalu River. MacArthur, instead of backing down, wanted to expand the war to China, even proposing to use nuclear weapons. This is when things get worse. President Harry Truman, who did not like MacArthur's arrogance, decided to fire him. The action shocked the nation, and when MacArthur returned to America, he was welcomed as a hero, although Washington politicians probably breathed a sigh of relief. Douglas MacArthur was a unique figure. His military career was marked by glorious victories, bold decisions, and no shortage of controversy. He was not only an excellent military strategist, but also a man who knew how to turn himself into a legend. But remember, under that halo are also the shadows of too big an ego and reckless decisions. So what is he? A strategic genius or a natural arrogant? The answer probably lies in each of our perspectives. Douglas MacArthur's leadership style and personality. If it were necessary to choose a general who was most emblematic of confidence, or should we say, confidence that sometimes crossed the line of arrogance, Douglas MacArthur would be at the top of the list. He not only leads with sharp strategy, but also with a charismatic personality, enough to make both allies and opponents both respectful and headache. 1. A person who leads with aura. MacArthur was not simply a general, he was a star. When you think of MacArthur, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the image of him wearing an elaborate baseball cap, trendy sunglasses, and always holding a pipe so big it could be used as a pipe. This style is not just for decoration, but also to send a clear message. I am your leader, and I know what I am doing. But if you think he did it for the army, well, that's only half right. MacArthur loved the spotlight, and he certainly didn't mind being the center of attention. Once, when commanding in the Philippines, he ordered his soldiers to film and record the scene of him stepping ashore, looking majestic like a god of war. It didn't matter that the battlefield was still filled with smoke and fire. 2. Assertive or authoritarian. MacArthur was known for his extremely decisive leadership style. Once he sets a goal, he accepts no objections. For him, there is no such thing as Plan B. For subordinates, this means they must always be ready to carry out orders without asking questions. But that assertiveness also comes with a price. At times, he was criticized for being authoritarian, even dictatorial. During the Korean War, MacArthur disregarded President Truman's orders and repeatedly proposed dangerous strategies such as attacking China and using nuclear weapons. This defiance makes one wonder, is he leading for the good of the nation or just for his own ego? 3. Inspiration. His soldiers loved him, but also feared him. It cannot be denied that MacArthur had a strong ability to inspire. His soldiers often described him as someone who could not be trusted. He was eloquent, with speeches that made listeners feel they were participating in a sacred mission. Taking, for example, his speech at West Point Military Academy in 1962, he emphasized the value of loyalty and honor with the saying, "Duty, honor, country." But don't let that inspiration fool you. MacArthur could be demanding and unforgiving. If you disobey him, the consequences will be memorable. Some subordinates even describe working with him as like walking on a tightrope. 4. Huge ego, his strongest and weakest weapon. MacArthur was famous for his enormous ego. Not only did he see himself as the center of decisions, but he also believed that everything would collapse without him. A typical example is when he was fired by President Truman during the Korean War. MacArthur's response? He organized a grand parade when he returned home and was welcomed by millions of people as a hero, and he did not even hesitate to criticize the government for its decision to fire him. But that giant ego is also a fatal weakness. Many people believe that if he knew how to step back at the right time, his career could have been more glorious. 5. People who always believe they are right, even when the whole world says they are wrong. MacArthur had an unshakable confidence. He believes he is always right, no matter what anyone says. He once said, "The only way to win a war is to attack the enemy until they cannot resist." This sounds great in theory, but in practice, his rigidity sometimes led him to make risky decisions, like during the Korean War, when he continued to push troops toward the Chinese border despite warnings. Douglas MacArthur was a complex figure. He is a talented leader who knows how to inspire and come up with sharp military strategies. But he is also a person with a huge ego, which sometimes overshadows his talent. His leadership style, although controversial, created a legacy that cannot be ignored. MacArthur not only led the army, he led his life like a big stage, where he was the brightest star, even though sometimes that light overshadowed those around him. Controversies during Douglas MacArthur's career. Douglas MacArthur was a figure both revered and highly criticized, a man whose glory and darkness went hand in hand. In a career spanning more than half a century, he not only impressed with his talent, but also stood out because of his controversies. If his career were a novel, these would be the chapters that would make readers both frustrated and unable to take their eyes off. 1. Conflict with President Harry Truman. The Battle of Two Egos. Perhaps the biggest controversy of MacArthur's career was his conflict with President Harry Truman during the Korean War. Everything started off quite smoothly. MacArthur led United Nations forces, repelling North Korean troops and even carrying out one of the most daring military campaigns in history, the landing at Incheon. But then, like an action movie with an unexpected twist, things start to get messy. As his army approached the Chinese border, Beijing did not sit still. They sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the Yalu River, surprising MacArthur. Instead of admitting that he had underestimated his opponent, he continued to heighten tensions by proposing using nuclear weapons to solve the problem. Harry Truman, who was actually in command of the US military, felt it was time to hit the pause button. But MacArthur, with his unlimited ego, openly criticized the president, viewing him as indecisive. And the result? Truman fired MacArthur. This event shocked American public opinion. The people divided into two camps. One side considered Truman a traitor, the other side thought MacArthur had gone too far. In fact, both are right. A little bit. 2. I am always right, you are always wrong. MacArthur was famous for his steadfastness, or frankly, stubbornness. He always believed he was right, even when all the experts and advisors told him he was wrong. For example, when Japan began invading the Philippines during World War II, MacArthur maintained his belief that he could defend the island, even though his army lacked weapons, food, and even hope. Result? The Philippines fell and MacArthur had to retreat in tragic scenes. But instead of admitting his fault, he claimed that he was sold out by the US government because of lack of support. The question is, was MacArthur a great general or one who never took responsibility when things went wrong? 3. Arrogance obscures victory. MacArthur was not only a general, but also a born theater artist. He loved the limelight so much that it sometimes obscured his real merits. A typical example is his return to the Philippines during World War II. The image of him stepping off the train, majestic like a god, was recorded by military cameramen. But few people know that this scene was redone several times to make sure it was perfect. Many people criticize that, instead of focusing on the battlefield, MacArthur sometimes focused too much on image creation. But let's be fair, that image created a legend that we still talk about today. 4. Politics and ambition for power. MacArthur was not just a general, he was also a hidden politician. Throughout his career, he was repeatedly rumored to run for president of the United States. Although he never officially participated in politics, his ambition for power was always clear. After being fired by Truman, MacArthur had the opportunity to address the United States Congress. His speech was full of emotion, ending with the famous quote, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away. Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." This speech sparked a wave of support for him, and many people thought he would run for president. But MacArthur, perhaps because of his big ego or the realization that politics was not for him, gave up the idea. 5. Love or conflict with allies. MacArthur often did not get along with colleagues and even allies. He tends to give orders rather than cooperate, making some people feel uncomfortable. During the campaign to retake Japan, he clashed with other generals because of his me-centered leadership style. But at the same time, he also won respect from his opponents, the Japanese generals, who acknowledged that he was an outstanding strategist, despite his somewhat unpleasant personality. Douglas MacArthur's post-war period, when swords were replaced by ballpoint pens. Douglas MacArthur, from a famous general on the battlefield, moved to an equally important but completely different role, the rebuilder of Japan. This was the period when he did the unexpected, turning a militaristic country into a modern democracy. Of course, there is no shortage of controversies and personal MacArthur marks. 1. Japan's last shogun. After Japan's surrender in 1945, MacArthur was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers, SCAP, to oversee the occupation and reconstruction of the nation. Simply put, he was not only a military leader, but also the throneless king of Japan. In this role, MacArthur had absolute power, running the country almost as he pleased. The Japanese, familiar with the image of the feudal shogun, called him the last shogun, a title that is both honorable and Slightly ironic. But let's be fair, MacArthur did not turn that power into a dictatorship and instead focused on rebuilding Japan. 2. Japan's major surgery. MacArthur led a comprehensive reform that transformed Japan from a militarized nation into a democracy. And the most surprising thing? He did it with a ballpoint pen, not with a gun or blade. Drafting the Japanese Constitution? Under MacArthur's supervision, the new Japanese Constitution was created in 1947. One of the highlights was Article 9, in which Japan renounced war as a tool for resolving international disputes. Perhaps you will think, a general who has held a sword all his life is promoting demilitarization? It's a paradox, but MacArthur understood that Japan's future did not lie in guns and bullets, but in peace and economic development. Promoting women's rights. MacArthur also suddenly became an activist for gender equality. He asked Japan to give women the right to vote and expand their role in society. For a culturally conservative country like Japan at that time, this was a revolution. 3. From enemies to allies. One of MacArthur's greatest achievements in the post-war period was transforming Japan from an arch-enemy into a close ally of the United States. He understood that a stable Japan would be an important shield against the spread of communism in Asia, the greatest threat to the US at that time. Under MacArthur's leadership, Japan quickly recovered economically, becoming one of the most developed countries in the world. Remarkably, he did it without resorting to his favorite military tactic. 4. Aura mixed with controversy. MacArthur, of course, could do nothing without controversy. Some Japanese felt that he was too imposing Western culture on Japanese society. Conservatives say he weakened the nation's samurai spirit. Meanwhile, his supporters see him as someone who saved Japan from collapse. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. MacArthur was a pragmatist, willing to do anything to achieve the best results, even if it made him misunderstood. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, MacArthur was called back to the battlefield. This marked the end of the post-war period in Japan. Even though he left, MacArthur's influence in Japan still lasted for decades. Japanese people, whether they love him or hate him, cannot deny that he changed the country forever. Douglas MacArthur not only left his mark on the battlefield, but also on history, politics, and culture. He is one of the greatest military figures, but his legacy is not all glory. Like the man himself, that legacy is a combination of illustrious achievements, bold decisions, and endless controversies. Douglas MacArthur, a man of great victories, painful defeats, and controversial stories. He is the embodiment of boldness, tenacity, and sometimes a giant, unbridled ego. From the Pacific battlefield to the historic reforms in Japan, MacArthur was not just a general, but a living legend that history cannot forget. But in the end, what does he leave us with? A series of lessons about leadership, ambition, and the limits necessary for success. Genius or extravagance? Hero or symbol of controversy? Perhaps that depends on each person's perspective. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to press the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss other fascinating historical stories. And leave your comments. What do you think about Douglas MacArthur? Legend or controversy? We'd love to hear from you.